the reformation of Washington, D.C., and what we can do on the local fronts and at the state levels as well. It has been way too long since I've had this next guest on the program. Really happy to have on the show with us as we talk about what we can do at state levels all over the nation. He is with Convention Estates Movement. ConventionEstates.com is the website. You can go and see exactly what they're all about. Really happy to have back on the program our first guest of 2025, the man himself, Mr. Mark Meckler. Mark, how are you, my friend? Happy New Year.
I'm doing great. Great to be back with you. What an honor to be your first guest.
Yeah, first guest of 2025. It's exciting. And I tell you what, I'm going into the year so excited and optimistic about what we could see with hopefully some major reformations and kind of a reset in Washington, D.C. But at the end of the day, which is why you guys have been pushing so hard for years with what you're doing, is the federal government can only do so much internally. It's going to take some outside forces to try and nudge things in the right direction in D.C. as well, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I'm exactly where you are. I'm as optimistic as I've been in my entire life in politics. I've been doing this 15 years. I've never seen a place with more optimism just over the horizon. So I'm excited what's going on. But I also know I'm a realist, and I've been doing this long enough to know D.C. will never fix itself. And we're going to have to do some of this stuff from the outside. I think Trump and Doge and all these great appointees are going to do great stuff. But we also have to remember that almost all of it can be reversed by the next Democrat administration. And what I'm working on is a project to make sure that what they fix stays fixed permanently.
Yeah. I know that right now it's so weird because we heard the last really two sessions of Congress. The media said that they were the quote unquote most unproductive congressional sessions that we've seen in, I don't know, like 100 years, 120 years, because they didn't pass a whole lot of bills. But yet at the same time, the Biden administration says it was one of the most successful presidential administrations in American history, which, of course, is laughable. And that's from Karine Jean-Pierre, and you can take her as what you will. But at the same time, the discrepancy between the two shows that really it's about executive orders and executive actions in D.C. It's not about actual legislation from Congress. That being said, something that can be done with the swipe of a pen of an executive order can be undone by the swipe of a pen with an executive order. How do we get things to actually stay permanent, actually get Congress to focus on legislation again, and get things done the way it's supposed to and the way that government's supposed to operate in D.C.?
Yeah, I mean, what we do is we go back to the Constitution. The Constitution tells us that if the federal government gets out of control, that we use Article 5 and we propose amendments to the Constitution that restrain the scope and the power of the federal government. I'll give you an example. We've got Donald Trump and others talking now about term limits. Amen. Hallelujah. Glad to hear that. Congress, by the way, is never, and I do mean never, going to pass a proposed term limits amendment for ratification by the states. It takes 2/3 of both houses. There's no way they have the votes for that. Ted Cruz, who repeatedly proposes this, I've congratulated him for that, and then I've asked if he's ever had a committee hearing, even a committee hearing, let alone a floor vote. He says no, and he never will. And so the reality is the only way you get term limits imposed is that we do that as the people by getting the states together in a convention of states and impose term limits ourselves. Term limits, a balanced budget amendment, tax caps, spending caps, limit the Supreme Court to 9, end birthright citizenship. These are all things that we can do by proposing amendments in a convention of states.
Yeah. What does it take for those that may not know? Let's talk about convention of states. What does it take to actually have states convene for a convention?
It takes 2/3 of the states to say that they want it. And the way that they do that is both houses of their legislature just pass a resolution that says we want to gather in convention. In our case, we're pushing something that calls for 3 things they can discuss. One is anything that would impose term limits, not just on Congress, but also on staffers and bureaucrats. I call it the Fauchy Amendment. Never want to see another Dr. Fauci in my life. We don't need anybody there for 40 years. Second is anything that would impose financial restraints on the federal government. So that includes not just not just a balanced budget amendment, but tax caps and spending caps. You can do that as well. You can impose generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. And then finally, anything that would impose what are called scope and jurisdictional limits on the federal government. And by that, I mean just telling the federal government what they can and cannot do. There were 17 things set out in the original Constitution that the federal government was supposed to be able to do and nothing else. And now it's like 17 million or something. And so, for example, they shouldn't be involved in education. There shouldn't be any Department of Education or energy or health care or the environment. All of those things should be handled by the states. And we could get that done by calling a convention of states and proposing those amendments.
Yeah, I love that. By the way, I love your Fauchy Amendment in there to be able to claim that. But if you do that, Mark, then that's deeming the fact that you're against science, right? Because Fauci is science.
Well, I think what it actually means is we're for science, which is we want all the states to do this stuff on their own and to experiment on their own. That's what science is about. It's not the science being one guy, right?
That's right. That's right. That's what it's all about. We're talking with Mark Meckler, Convention of States, conventionofstates.com. It seems like there's a growing interest in the conversation, which is what essentially you guys are advocating for, which is the idea in terms of federalism, which I have not heard people talk about federalism in a very long time, bringing power back down to the states, allowing states to have authority again, getting rid of the deep state or that fourth branch of government, and then, of course, with the states convening for a convention to make decisions on Washington, D.C. To me, just the fact that so many more people are talking about even just the concept of federalism more that we've seen in a while is encouraging to me, because that means people are starting to remember the fact that, oh, hey, states actually have the rights to make decisions, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, this is the fundamental thing that makes America special, in my opinion. The idea that the framers understood that if you centralize power, bad things will happen. And the way we got this right, by the way, it shows how prescient they were, how much they understood the future, is that they said in 1787 in convention, 2 days before the end of convention, Colonel George Mason stood up and he said, we have a problem with the document. We gave the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we didn't give that power to the people acting through the states. And he asked a question. He said, are we so naive that we believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? And we know what their answer was, because Madison's notes say there was no debate. In other words, they decided to give the states this power to call a convention to propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny, because they knew that someday federal tyranny would come.
Yeah. That's very true. We got a couple minutes left here, Mark. As we talk about trying to get states on board, you said that we need an X amount of states to try and join this movement to agree to a convention. How many are on board right now, and how many are close? I mean, I live in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas, where my flagship is. I know we've tried it for years here in Kansas, and it hasn't gone anywhere yet. And which blows my mind, because we're a relatively red state with our supermajority of a red Republican legislature. How many states do we have right now, and how many more do we need to get on board?
It takes 34. We're well past the halfway mark at 19. Kansas is a unique situation. We've actually passed in Kansas multiple times. It takes a simple majority. In the Kansas Constitution was a special provision put in there in 1974 to protect Roe versus Wade, and it says that it takes a two-thirds majority in your state legislature instead of a simple majority. Yeah. And we've not been able to cross that threshold. I think that's unconstitutional. That's being litigated by some of your legislators right now, and I predict that we're going to pass Kansas early in 2025.
It's a great point. We got just about a minute left here, Mark. There's a concern from some that say that a convention could potentially get out of hand and lead us in the other direction and actually make things worse. Is that actually possible, and what would happen at a convention?
Yeah, utterly impossible. In fact, every single large group on the left in the United States of America has taken a position against this because they don't believe that can happen. They don't like it. The way the convention works is they go in. The only things they can discuss are the three things that it would take 26 states to make a suggestion. Important to remember, the only thing that can come out of convention is a suggestion, and then it takes 38 states to ratify it. So I ask people who are afraid of it, well, tell me what you're afraid of, and then tell me the 38 states that would ratify it. Nobody's ever been able to tell me anything. Right now, there are 30 states with both houses controlled by Republicans. You just can't ratify anything that you or I wouldn't like.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Republicans, thank God, I mean, we're better at the grassroots campaigning, that we, like you said, have the majority of the state legislatures across the nation. I can't see them going in the opposite direction, making things worse. Mark, we're out of time, my friend. Good luck in 2025. I am optimistic that we can see some movement on both ends, from D.C. and from the state level. Let's get you back on the show and do another update soon.
Sounds great. Appreciate y'all. Thanks.
Hey, you betcha. Happy New Year to you. Again, Mark Meckler, Convention of States. Find more information online at conventionofstates.com.